Hey everybody, today I'll be reading my latest essay, Oil, Soil, and Mushroom Clouds. If you're listening on X, Rumble, or Substack and would like to read along, you can find the full essay directly below this video. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or any of the other audio streamers, you can find the link to the full essay in the episode description. And if not, sit back, relax, and I'll take you through it. As always, I'll provide some additional commentary and context at the end. And if you are not subscribed to my Substack yet, please do so. bravenewnormal.substack.com. All right, now that we have the promotional items out of the way, let's get into it. Oil, Soil, and Mushroom Clouds. NATO's hunger for nuclear war. Justin Trudeau stands behind a podium at an aerospace facility somewhere in Quebec. He and his gang of marauders are there to make an announcement. Likely an exaggerated claim about a superficial economic boost in his ongoing endeavor to convince voters he's resurrecting a standard of living his own government spent the last 9 years pulverizing. I, and every other Canadian, would be more receptive to his promise of impending middle-class prosperity were we all not convinced his mouth is a bull sphincter from which shit spews. The only interest Canadians currently have in aerospace is the proposition that we could someday build a rocket capable of launching our Prime Minister to the furthest edges of the universe. The only moment of the hour-long campaign speech worth paying attention to is a response to a reporter's question about NATO's escalation of war with Russia. Trudeau's demeanor quickly shifts and his face contorts into a determined expression. These are the brief flashes where we see the true nature of the black-faced boy wonder, not in the stern and dogged disposition he presents, but in the comical transparency of his attempt to demonstrate anything resembling the resolve of a compelling leader. It's a performance delivered by a community theater actor, conceived by an 8th-grade playwright. Nobody with any sense for normal human behavior believes Trudeau's strongman routine. He and his severely diminished military aren't even gifted the privilege of being an afterthought in the realm of global conflict. We're a far cry from the fearsome Canadian battalions who stunned the Brits and Americans with graphic displays of cruelty against the Germans in World War I. That's not to say the will to fight doesn't still live within the Canadian Armed Forces, but since Trudeau has cut most of our military's budget, large swaths of our enlisted men and women have left their ranks for the simple fact that they couldn't afford to defend our country. I doubt many of them would show much enthusiasm for picking up arms after their experience serving in our Crown Prince's DEI Corps. So here he is, issuing threats to Vladimir Putin, a man he isn't qualified to be a sex toy for. During the last 3 years, Trudeau has periodically given performances like this one, undoubtedly influenced by his deputy prime minister, whose previous career as an alleged journalist includes crafting propaganda for Ukrainian organizations with relevant links to the American deep state. He's a parody of a dim-witted dignitary, as is Joe Biden. Both were installed in favor of their near-vacant mental faculties. Biden's the result of a worsening neurological condition. Trudeau's not so much. The United States doesn't have a functioning president. That's been obvious since at least 2021, if not for his entire term. We don't know who's running the Oval Office, but it's safe to assume the neocon chicken hawks behind the Bush and Obama regimes are the same ones steering the Biden administration. War is their business. The conflicts they orchestrate are never supposed to end. They spend 20 years in Afghanistan stripping out whatever resources they're after while generating colossal fortunes for defense contractors. Then they hand the country back to the Taliban with the full expectation the Afghani population will suffocate under inhumane oppression, thus leaving the door open for the United States to return whenever the Taliban has something they want. It's a perpetual cycle. The loss of American and NATO allied lives are collateral damage in the process of world conquest. Iraq was a brilliant smash-and-grab scheme. Saddam Hussein was a ruthless dictator, but his presence in the region was a wedge between warring Islamic sects since he made it abundantly clear he had zero preference in who he tortured and killed. He was a necessary evil in some ways, and when that evil was removed, Iraq was permanently destabilized, again leaving the gates wide open to the overwhelming military intervention that feeds neoconservative greed. Ukraine was supposed to be a similar situation. The Russians sat by and watched NATO expand eastward in the years since the United States assured them it would never happen. On numerous occasions, Vladimir Putin pleaded with them to stop, early on even requesting to join NATO in an effort to avoid what could eventually grow into a direct confrontation. The American military-industrial complex arrogantly dismissed his warnings, continuing a pattern of contemptuous behavior that cuts as far back as 1939. For nearly a century, the West has routinely underestimated the competence of the Russian military, and in almost every instance, they've been proven wrong. The US-sponsored Maidan coup in 2014 was a step too far. NATO, an alliance created with the explicit intent to defend against Soviet aggression, was now the aggressor arriving on Russia's doorstep. Russia annexed Crimea, a highly valuable peninsula along the Black Sea, with total awareness that if they didn't, they would lose access to an extremely important trade route. Who truly owns Crimea has always been up for debate. The region was awarded to Ukraine from Russia in 1954 when they were part of the Soviet Union. So in essence, Crimea has technically belonged to the Russians since the 1917 revolution, and now the US was demanding Russia give the peninsula back to the NATO-controlled territory. The invasion was inevitable. If China were to blockade the port of Los Angeles, Beijing would be a pile of rubble in minutes. No self-respecting world power would accept a foreign adversary threatening their economic vitality without a response. Ukraine was never going to win the war. Anyone who can comprehend basic math or has an acute knowledge of Russia's history and large-scale conflict knew it would be a disaster for Ukrainians. This was never about liberating anyone. It was always about provoking Russia into a confrontation that would weaken its military and place Ukraine with its abounding natural resources, specifically in the Donbass and Crimea, squarely in the hands of the U.S. State Department and its stakeholders. It's about BlackRock and others making trillions on the manufacturing of weapons, and trillions more rebuilding the country once it's been reduced to a smoking crater. It's about NATO gaining a foothold inches from a depleted enemy who also happens to have a firm grip around European oil and gas. Biden Inc. has approved the use of long-range, mostly British missiles against Russia. Vladimir Putin emphatically stated this would be a declaration of war between NATO and the immense country he governs. China has cautiously allied itself with Russia, as has India to a lesser degree, which means the United States and its puppet nations could find themselves in direct combat with three of the largest landmasses and populations on Earth. The US and NATO know this is a losing scenario, and are resting their strategy on the slim chance at winning a thermonuclear staring contest. They're hedging their bets on Putin, a cold-blooded authoritarian, backing down before hostilities escalate into a world-ending exchange of warheads. It's a battle to determine who is more audacious, with the lives and future of the entire human species hanging in the balance. The American machine is an amalgamation of neoconservative psychopaths and corporate vampires. It's become the very definition of a fascist military dictatorship. They want the Western public to believe Russia's invasion of Ukraine was an unprovoked attack, despite spending the last 30 years crossing lines that Russia has had to reluctantly revise many times over. Ukraine was the final straw, and with NATO's insistence on adding the historically neutral nation into its fold, Russia had no choice but to mobilize in the interests of its own defense. Now we find ourselves back in a Cold War we arguably never left. However, this time there are no adults in the room. The continents have become a playground for a group of maniacal toddlers behind the wheel of a 100-megaton wrecking ball, swinging the chain wildly across Eastern Europe, with humanity's survival depending on a former KGB agent's capacity to tolerate it. The odds are not in our favor on either side. The US and NATO have introduced the notion of limited nuclear war as if such a thing were possible. At the launch of the first ICBM, the targeted country has roughly 5 to 10 minutes to decide how they'll respond. For all his faults and murders of political opponents, I don't imagine Putin being the one to initiate the exchange, which means he will be the lone figure to decide if Russia is a deserving sacrifice for human civilization, or if he'll unload his own, and largest, nuclear stockpile into Europe and North America, evaporating all living creatures into a radioactive mist drifting through the cosmos. Considering the amount of fortitude and restraint the Russian president has been forced to exercise as his country was slowly surrounded by a merciless rival, the prospect he will strike back in a spectacular blaze of glory is the more realistic outcome. In June 1941, Adolf Hitler began his invasion of the Soviet Union. Nearly 4 years and millions of dead Germans later, the Fuhrer put a bullet in his head as the Red Army closed in on his bunker in Berlin. The story of World War II as told by the Western Allies is one of collaboration between democratic nations to defeat the greatest tyrannical threat the free world has ever known. But the truth is that if Hitler never double-crossed Stalin and violated their non-aggression pact, the free world would more than likely have been swallowed by a vastly expanded Lebensraum, one that would have seen Europe, Asia, and potentially the Americans carved up into fascist and communist districts. Now, 80 years later, another fascist empire is poised to learn the same lesson, but in a globally devastating fashion. don't ever underestimate Russia. Damn, I fucked up on that last line. Sorry, guys. I'm really trying hard not to stumble through these, but man, reading out loud is not my talent. I'm getting better, but still, there were some stumbles here, and I apologize if it kind of messed up the flow. But there it is. I spent a long time thinking about this one. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the stuff that I'm writing lately because, of course, my readership has grown like tremendously, and I want to make sure that I'm representing myself and my ideas properly. But this one specifically, I spent a lot of time, did a lot of reading, going back through old books, and listening to a lot of people like Jeffrey Sachs, Mike Benz, and a long list of others, to kind of get it right. Because, I have my perspective on this, and, as with any conflict, there are multiple angles and perspectives to consider. One thing I didn't want to do was come across as being a Russia or a Putin sympathizer. I am not. Vladimir Putin is a cold-blooded killer, and as cold-blooded as they come. He's basically a dictator. Russia, as we know it today, is not a democracy, at least in my opinion. I had to be very careful in writing this because in this instance, in this circumstance, NATO and the United States are unequivocally wrong. This invasion was going to happen. As I wrote in the piece itself, it was inevitable. We kept pushing and kept pushing and kept pushing. And really, I believe what the intent was what we have now, to force Russia to mobilize, to use a nation like Ukraine that has zero chance at winning a war against Russia, to deplete the Russian military and to weaken them so that, whatever the American deep state wants to do next is, whatever their ambitions may be, they are capable of achieving them, which, again, I personally believe they want what Russia has, and they want to be able to roll into Russia in a not-so-distant future. Ukraine, obviously, with their abundance in natural resources, they have some of the most fertile soil on Earth. There are tons and tons and tons of opportunities there for the neoconservative machine and the associated corporations to take advantage. And I think Ukraine was just a perfect opportunity for them. But the United States and NATO are making the exact same mistake that Adolf Hitler made in 1941. Hitler believed that he would be able to just walk into Russia and take Eastern Europe, and that did not happen. The narrative that we've been taught in school is that, the United States, Canada, Britain, France, well, not France, not France, could have used you, France, but not France. The narrative that we've been taught is that the Allies won World War II. But the true story behind World War II is that it was largely Russia and the fighting on the Eastern Front that crushed the Nazis. And, they learned in the most brutal and horrific way that Russia is not to be underestimated. And we are going to learn the same lesson again if we don't smarten up. And, the prospect for nuclear war, I think, is the strongest that it's ever been, even stronger than the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we have a group of people inside the U.S. government who are embedded, deeply embedded, who actually believe they could fire a nuclear missile into Russia and face no repercussions, that they could wipe Moscow off the map, and that would be it. I don't know why they believe this, because, general knowledge tells us, you could look up Russia's nuclear program and stockpile. You could literally read about it and learn about it on YouTube, which is what I've done. They have a very, very significant and sophisticated nuclear program. And were we to ever fire warheads in their direction, North America would be gone instantly. And so that's really what we're facing here, and that's really the direction we're going. We've seen the United States and NATO introduce the idea of limited nuclear war through mainstream media, and that's That's such a danger. I mean, it's the most dangerous proposition. Like, I mean, there is no greater threat to humanity than this. And that's where they're leading us. And now with the use of long-range missiles into Russia, we are goading Putin into doing something drastic. Because, you know, Ukraine is essentially firing rockets into highly populated areas and deep into Russia now. And we are basically inviting Putin to respond in, I mean, just absolutely devastating way. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, and as I wrote in this essay, we are vastly underestimating the strength and the will of our supposed enemy. And so I think what we should all be doing right now, I know that there are a lot of distractions, the American election coming up and all of these different things, and, you know, the multiple assassination attempts against Trump. There's a lot going on in our world, but I think that we need to set our focus on this right now, because we need to send the message to the people who are gambling with our lives, literally gambling with our lives and the future of the human species overall, that we are not okay with this. And that, you know, in my opinion, this scenario that we now find ourselves in is grounds for a revolution. You know, I said earlier in my last audio essay that I believe censorship is the issue of our time, and I think that it is. But this particular scenario, I think, is grounds for something that could spark a revolution, because there's absolutely no way we are getting out of this alive if either side fires an ICBM in the other's direction. There was a lot more that I wanted to explore in this essay. I didn't mention the bombing of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I didn't mention a lot of the other things that have gone on within this war, just the insane amount of corruption and just evil that the U.S. and NATO have unleashed on Ukraine. I kind of wanted to keep it slim and stay on topic rather than veering off. So I didn't explore that stuff, but there is so much more to this story. And, you know, I encourage everybody to read up on NATO and its constant expansion from, you know, 1994 onwards, because it's just, I mean, we have literally been poking the bear for 30 plus years, and now here we are right on their doorstep, and we could not be in a more dangerous place. This is the most dangerous place we have ever found ourselves, and I don't think most of us are aware of how dangerous this is. Yeah, and, you know, I where I live in Alberta, we have a lot of Ukrainian refugees who have arrived, and I've spent time talking to a lot of them, and their perception is actually much the same as mine and as most of the West, that this is a confrontation or a conflict that was provoked by the United States and has caused Russia to act, and now they are displaced. They are mostly angry at us in the West. I mean, they're angry at Putin, of course, because they've had their lives blown to pieces, and, you know, they've been shelled relentlessly. But they're mostly angry at us because they understand the geopolitical circumstances that led to this. And unfortunately, the Ukrainian people have been caught in the middle. And now a lot of them, like I said, you know, I was talking to a young lady who was a hotel manager in Kiev, and now she's here in Canada as a refugee, and she's cleaning hotel rooms as a maid. And she said in a lot of ways she would like to go back to Europe because she doesn't feel safe here. She thinks that we are jumping headfirst into something that we don't understand. And yeah, that kind of floored me when she said that, because she said she would feel more safe in a place like Belgium or even Poland than she does here, which is wild. But yeah, so I guess that's it. There was so much more to talk about here, but you know, with this stuff, I want to keep it short. This was already, you know, longer than I had anticipated it would be. But yeah, maybe I'll come back. I'll probably come back and explore this more in the future, much like the censorship topic, because there's so much more going on underneath it all. And, you know, as time goes on, I think that, you know, more and more is coming to the surface, and we're starting to realize that We're not the good guys. So there it is. If you want to follow my work, you can follow me on X at JasonJamesBNN. But please, please, please subscribe to my Substack, bravenewnormal.substack.com. You can listen to the podcast there. You can read all my writing there. You can listen to the audio essays there. You can get everything there. That's the central hub for all of my work. So if you're not subscribed yet, please go through and do that. And thank you all for listening. Thank you all for joining me on this ride. I went into this to exploring this subject curious, and I came out terrified. So I encourage all of you to do the reading as well. But that's it for now, and I'll see y'all next week with a new episode of the Brave New Normal podcast. Until then, take care of yourselves. Be good, be safe, love God, and love yours. Peace.